Welcome to the Divine Counsel Worldview Podcast. We are finding ourselves at the end of Genesis, near the end where Joseph has been recognized by the Pharaoh as the man to lead Egypt through a severe drought. And chapters 42 through 44. Let's handle 3 chapters today, Mike. I think we can do that. Let me throw an idea to you. And you just mentioned before we got on the air that you're going to be preaching this Sunday. So I'd love to hear just a quick overview of what you're talking about. And I think this would be a good lead into your point or your sermon this Sunday. I visited a church since we last talked, and it doesn't matter which one really. It was a large, almost like a mega church here in the Minneapolis area. And it was funny how, and maybe I'm showing my cynical side here. When I got in, I sat down and I said to myself, I wonder how much of this sermon and this whole morning I can predict. In other words, we'll stand for a set of singing. There'll be a greeting time. Then there'll be a sermon. And my guess will be, and I could see where his sermon was going to be. It was in, I think, Samuel. And I kind of predicted where it would go based on, my tradition is conservative evangelical, basically. That's where I've landed. And I was pretty accurate in my prediction. And here's the issue, though, that I was thinking about. And it comes into our study of Genesis as a whole, and especially as we come to the end of Genesis. Aside from just retelling the story, which we're not going to do, there's no reason to read. In fact, that's the way to enjoy this story, I think, is just to read it. That's the way it was devised or composed. It's made to be read, right? But besides just retelling the story in a podcast like this as a Divine Counsel Worldview conversation, how is it meant to be enjoyed? In other words, what can a DCW angle do for us here? And let me throw some ideas at you, Mike, and then I would love to get your off-the-cuff response. Number 1, concerning the which God question, Yahweh's name, it's interesting, in 39 to 50 of Genesis, is basically missing. It's interesting that Yahweh, again, whether they had the name already or it's put in by the editors later, the name Yahweh basically is missing after the 4 occurrences in chapter 39 where it says Yahweh was with Joseph 4 times, verses 2, 3, 21, and 23. And then you basically have no mention of Yahweh's name. The rest of the story, which I find interesting, and we'll talk about it as we go, that maybe this is because it's playing into an Egyptian audience, maybe that's why this story was written the way it was. Secondly, Elohim, as we've seen that generic title used, it will be interesting in the lips of the speakers, whether it be Joseph or even Jacob or the brothers, how that title is used. I think that's where a DCW angle, even in the Joseph narrative, can be interesting. And again, I'm going to highlight some of that as we go. And then when it comes to how we use the text, this is what I was thinking of during that sermon that I visited the church. It's interesting that to me, and here's where I'd like to get your opinion, Mike, a DCW doesn't concern itself over much. And in fact, let me make my case too strong, and you pull me off the cliff. A DCW approach to the Bible, especially in narrative scripture, does not angle itself toward trying to moralize the text. In other words, it's not asking, did Joseph do the right thing or the wrong thing here? That may come out in the story, might be quite clear. Now, today, in fact, we're going to notice that Joseph basically lies or deceives his brothers about 7 times and in 7 different ways. And again, do we preach a sermon then? In other words, we're talking to a modern audience and we're wondering, how do we make this story work for them today or tomorrow morning? And I find, again, like in that Samuel sermon I'm talking about, the preacher basically just moralized his way through the story, saying, in effect, don't do this, do this, don't do what he did, do what he did. And I did come out of that thinking, that's where the DCW is different. That I'm not looking at a text, likely, looking for a moralization of it. Because again, what is the story there for? It's principally to tell me the story of Israel and the story of the God who created the story, as it were, that we join in the end. So, for example, again, as we come into the Joseph story, let's not forget, and I say this now to our audience in kind of a preparation again, remember, there's a story being told on three levels: God, humans, and even divine beings, even in the Joseph narrative. And since Genesis 11, all humans are attaching themselves to gods who have been entrusted by Yahweh to manage, as it were, the world. And so when Joseph goes to Egypt, we're supposed to remember that he's entering other Elohim territory. And we add one more thing to this, that Yahweh, since Genesis 12, is asking humans to worship him while respecting the role that those Elohim have in God's plan. So notice again, when I go through that, that's not really moralizing, therefore, what I see in Joseph's life. I could maybe, but it's not where I'm finding my mind going, as it were. So anyway, I threw a lot at you there, but I was just thinking about that as I came away from a church experience this last month. And then when you mentioned your preaching, I thought, well, let me give you my burden going in. So how are you doing? And let us know how your sermon's going to go this Sunday from what you can tell.
So I think, the tendency, and this is something that we've been covering in my doctoral program, is that a lot of times one of the easiest paths that people approach the scriptures with is moralization, right? And it's very easy to do that because oftentimes when we use stories, one of the most basic concepts is the story telling me what to do or what not to do? Is it providing me examples or good or bad examples of, emulate this guy or don't emulate this guy? And so that's like one of the most simplest ways of how people approach the scriptures and how they use it and how they employ it within their churches. Part of the problem, though, is that oftentimes the moralization is coming from our own particular at present moment of morality or ethics. And so, when we see these moments like what you were saying with Joseph, as he's dealing with his brothers when they still don't realize he's Joseph, that it's very easy for us to import our understanding of morality and our concept of what lying or not lying, being honest or not being honest or deceptive, or however you wanted to call it. We can easily bring that right into what's going on with the story and never consider, well, how would have the original audience understood what Joseph was doing? Would they have considered this technically lying? Would they have had such a rigid understanding of morality as the way that we often in the West like to categorize things? And, in some sense, because of that, we also don't have the drive to then decide or to dig into what's the background, what are the motives, what are the reasonings behind what we're perceiving as Joseph's actions. And so I think that's where the DCW does, lend an advantage, I honestly think, because it actually forces us to pause, read the text, and dig into if there are things that confuse us or we wonder, well, why would he do that? And I know if I was in his situation, I wouldn't do that. And to just simply have that question, and that question is supposed to drive us to look for research or answers or just background or details to help flesh out the story in a much fuller way. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of, for me, what's been the advantage of having this kind of mindset in the back of my mind when I've been doing my studies at Gordon, is because, our teachers will tell us, yes, study the historical, grammatical, everything about the text, but it's so much simpler and it's so tempting to just immediately I have a sermon I got to preach this Sunday. And I don't have the time to dig through every commentary or go to the library or wherever else. I just need to get a sermon out. Yeah. And it's very tempting to do that. My process currently,
Oops, I'm sorry. What are you preaching on this Sunday?
Well, I'm preaching on Jonah chapter 4, technically. We've been, in my church, going through a series about basically faith and politics and where our allegiances ultimately lie. Is it to a particular ideology, political ideology, or is our allegiance in the end going to be to Yahweh, to the Lord Jesus Christ? to the kingship of Jesus. Because I'm up in Boston, and so our church congregation politically, we're all across the map.
Are you? Okay. So is
right?
mine.
Like we have political leanings everywhere. But one of the things that my pastor has been emphasizing is that it's fine if you have a political leaning that you like. That's an expression of your being made in the image of God, right? That we're representing him. We're desiring certain things about his rule and his shalom that is desirable. And we think, oh, this leaning seems to provide that advantage here. But the problem is when our leanings become our bows, when they become what we are allegiant to and not to ultimately King Jesus. And that's why we can easily fracture and divide within a congregation. And so that's the thrust. And so my passage in Jonah chapter 4, I'm looking at it, and main focus that I'm going to bring out is we can never experience God's mercy. Like, this is my homiletical idea. We cannot experience God's mercy without God's justice. That the reason why Jonah acted the way he did was ultimately, ironically, he knew about God's mercy, especially towards northern Israel, but he was unable and unwilling to offer the same kind of mercy to the Ninevites.
Right.
And chapter 4 is a moment where God is teaching him in this moment. Why is it that you had more pity for the plant that gave you shade, that you neither grew, you neither watered, it grew overnight and it died overnight? Why is it that you were willing to show mercy to this plant? And yet you are essentially upset at me of extending mercy to a city of over 120,000 people and their cows. and something about cows, that they're supposed to invoke. Why? Why is it so easy to want God's mercy for yourself, but not want to give God's mercy to others around you? Yeah. And so, and a lot of my ideas came from having to study passages like 2 Kings 14, looking at the history of Assyria, looking at the fact that Nineveh was one of the cities that worshiped the goddess Ishtar. Yeah. Like, why is it that Jonah was so afraid, or he was disgusted at the idea of going to the city? Because they were worshiping this particular goddess, especially, who was a goddess of not just fertility of all kinds, a storm goddess, but she was also the goddess of war. She was their main patron that inspired the Assyrians, especially, to conquer all the lands around them.
Cool. It was that'd be fun to hear your take on that. So.
Yeah, so it's just this interesting thing. It's like when you start fleshing this out, like the DCW forces me to want to understand, like, what is the background and the culture of the people reading this. Yeah. And so then once I start having that in my mind, I can start interfacing with what I am reading in the text and seeing, Jonah runs. Is it really because he's a reluctant prophet? Or is he using his running away to try to force God's hand to destroy these people?
Yeah.
And he even admits to that by the end in chapter 4. You're left to wonder what the heck is Jonah doing until chapter 4. And then he makes it clear, I knew this was going to happen. I knew if I came
I knew you'd be nice.
Yeah. And all that. I mean, again, it exposes what I would normally think a prophet is supposed to be. Like, oh, this is a guy that's supposed to cry out for fire and brimstone. But it then forces me to question, wait a minute, isn't that the job of a prophet? Is just to basically condemn people? It doesn't seem like it from what Jonah is saying. So what is a prophet? And then that digs me into that pathway of like, well, what did other prophets do in the past? And then realizing, okay, prophets ultimately, yes, they had messages that were harsh, but the reason they had the messages that were harsh was because it was supposed to provide the opportunity for people to repent. And so in Jonah's mind, I knew if I went to this city and I gave this harsh message, there was now a chance.
Yeah, he's giving them a chance, which he didn't want to do. Yeah.
Yeah, he wanted to guarantee their destruction.
The Jew-Gentile problem of Jesus' day is just budding in Jonah, right?
Oh, yeah.
Starting to come. Yep.
Yeah, and it's just so in there. And so, anyways, that's the challenge. And like to me, when we were talking about the political series, it was just like so often at times when we're breaking into these political partisan lines, you don't see much mercy at all.
Yeah.
Much understanding from any person on one extreme or the other. And within the church, that can be so divisive and harmful and hurtful to the community. And it's just, we often forget one of the mercy we receive that we love. We are called to give the same to others.
Yeah, good point. Well, best wishes tomorrow in your sermon. I know you got to get back to it after we're done recording today. I was blessed, and maybe I mentioned this along the way in our other podcast, that I was blessed with two uncles in my mom's side, my mom's two brothers-in-law, two uncles who were on the far ends of the political spectrum. One was a ardent Republican, and the other was an ardent Democrat. So what was neat about it, and unique about it, frankly, was they're both avid Christians too. Very, very devoted to Jesus, and yet they came at their political questions completely different. So I grew up with that, and I was used to hearing gentle, if not poignant, conversation over the Thanksgiving table from two very opposite views, but they could both be Christians. It was fun to see. Well, I'm ready to jump into Genesis 42, 3, and 4 today. And so let's just jump into the text. I'm not going to read much. I'm just going to overview it and, again, highlight DCW issues that come out of the story that you, the listener, hopefully know. I don't want to give it away if you've not read the story, but I'm presuming you have. And so now we're basically reviewing this now. So 42, verses 1 through 3, the 10 brothers without Benjamin now come down to Joseph, who is, again, by Pharaoh's own design, has been placed over the entire land, second only to the Pharaoh. Verses 4 through 8, Joseph recognizes them, but not vice versa. Again, it's been 22 years since he was 17 when he was sold. Now he's 39. And we know that, by the way, because 41:46 says he's 30 when he stands in front of the Pharaoh. And 45:11, he talks about 2 more years or 5 more years of the famine have yet to go. So if you add all that together, he's 39 by the time he stands in front of his brothers. And again, they don't know him or don't recognize him. He's speaking Egyptian, looking Egyptian, in a position of power that they wouldn't have expected. In fact, they thought he was dead. So it all makes sense. Verses 9 through 12, then Joseph pretends, and here we come with these deceptions that are, again, all's fair in love and war, and that's not in the Bible, of course, but I think there's wisdom in this, that when it comes to a surprise birthday party, you're allowed, shall we say, in our way of thinking, to deceive your loved one to get them to the party, right? And that's kind of what's going on here, that he pretends. Verses 9 through 12, no, you are spies, and you've come down to spy out the land. And then 13 to 24, it's basically just Joseph demanding to see the younger brother, who one of them must have allowed that to come out. Joseph doesn't, he can't by definition say, I'm missing one of your brothers here, because that would give him away. So they acknowledge on their own that this is not their entire family, and they admit they have a brother at home. So by the time you get up to verse 24, he's basically just saying, I demand to see that younger brother, and the way we'll do that is by keeping, verse 24, Simeon. We're not sure how he chose Simeon, but that gets us through verse 24, with Simeon staying behind and the brothers about to return. One thing I want to catch, and then if you have anything you want to add to, again, the first half of 42, let me know, Mike. But the word for aman in Hebrew, which we translate often as faith or trust, is in verse 20 of chapter 42, but it comes out interestingly as the word verified in my New King James. And bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be aman. It just, again, verifies for me that, or confirms that the word aman in Hebrew has a sense of stability, again, steadfastness, loyalty. Again, how we get the word loyalty out of Ammon is not trying to push it in there. It just flows out of the word because, again, as we see it in verse 20, it's translated as verified or made sure. So it just puts a little bit of oomph on the word Ammon as it's being used there in verse 20. Otherwise, I have no other comments from a DCW point of view on anything that happens up to verse 24. Anything you want to add?
Well, I do find it interesting that the text says, as Joseph saw his brothers, he remembered the dream. I think it was in verse 9.
Verse 9,
and
yeah.
Joseph, in the ESV, it says, and Joseph remembered the dreams that he had dreamed of them. And, it's considering there were only a couple of dreams that were directly associated with the brothers or the family. Like this is like a callback to when he was a kid and he told everyone, including his mom and dad, about the dream of the stars or the bushels of wheat bowing down before him. So I find it interesting that the author here is bringing this up, like using that as a narrative point of, yeah, do you remember that dream a long while ago? That actually is coming into play now for Joseph.
Yeah. A lot of these phrases are trying to get the reader to say, oh, that's right. I remember how that worked back in fact, verse 21, I marked this. We are truly, they said to Joseph, guilty concerning our brother, for we saw, talking about Joseph, we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us. Excuse me. And there's nothing back in 37 that records the pleading of Joseph with his brothers. But now you learn in 42:21, in retrospect, how painful that moment must have been for Joseph being sold into slavery, because they remembered it. He pleaded with us and we would not hear. So it adds a little bit of luster to that story.
Yeah. It provides a detail that is, that's also the other thing that recently in my study of Jonah is that authors, like the author of Jonah, they are doing these things purposely where they're not including all the details immediately at the moment, but using these other, later points in the story of fleshing out the details. And then it fills in the gaps in our knowledge of like, oh dear. And it makes sense. You get thrown into a well, into a cistern. And the only way you can get out is if the people who threw you in threw you a line or a rope to get out. Like, of course he would be pleading. But it is so telling that 20 something odd years later, this memory of his begging them, it like has haunted their memory. So it's already sort of the narrator is hinting to us, these brothers were terrible people at that moment. But
I'm stunned.
Tortured.
Even looking back, how wicked they were for so long. That's what's interesting.
Yeah. And it just this is a memory that has tortured or haunted them for decades. And so there's almost like as though like they have shifted. There has been a change because they've now suffered with this reality of this terrible secret they've kept inside.
I wonder if Joseph had not envisioned this. Well, he must have, because if he knows the dreams, and you're right that he brings it up in verse 9, I wonder how much of this story is being played out in rehearsal form in Joseph's mind. In other words, he thought over the years, if my brothers do meet me down here, A, they'll be amazed, but B, I wonder what I should do. And so maybe what he does here, and that's actually, let's keep moving, because what he does is ingenious. And it sounds like someone who had been thinking about this and how to plan this out long before it happened. So 25 to 28, verses 25 to 28 of chapter 42, the brothers return to Canaan, finding their money in their individual sacks. And it scares them. In fact, they even say in 28, what is this that Elohim, no article, has done to us? and I wrote in my own margin, did the editors not use Yahweh there, which sometimes they put in Yahweh, right, as a name, but did the editors or the writer of this not put in Yahweh? Did that indicate that they were not Yahwists? I have no idea. That shouldn't necessarily, throw the conversation in either direction for sure. But it's interesting that they just say, well, look what Elohim has done to us, using the standard title for a divine being. Again,
Can I throw in a possible idea?
Pardon? Yeah, go ahead.
Because something similar happens within the book of Jonah, because the names El, Elohim, Yahweh, Yahweh, Elohim, they're all used in the book of Jonah, and they seem so purposeful. And then it's so odd that when you get to chapter 4, and when when Yahweh is talking with Jonah in particular, and they're finally having a conversation, the word Elohim is used instead of Yahweh with Jonah in that moment. Even though all the other instances with Jonah, it was with Yahweh. And it seems to be the one proposal is that the word Elohim, at least in the book of Jonah, was being used as almost a it encapsulates a universality. That he is not just Yahweh of the Israelites. He is the God of all peoples.
Right.
And so dealing with Jonah while talking about the Ninevites as well, that I'm not just your God, Jonah. I am also the God of all the Ninevites, of all people groups. And so I wonder, it could also be just a hint that maybe the brothers were not Yahwists. They just had a general okay, we kind of like this God of our fathers. Maybe not. But since it's also dealing with Joseph, who they think is an Egyptian, and with just the Egyptians themselves, it could also be just a way of saying, this is the same God who's dealing with not just this family, but overall all of the other families, including Egypt.
Yeah. I think it's very possible. Verses 29 to 35, then the brothers tell their story to their dad. And basically that's where you have that, this is Elohim that did this to us. And then 36 to 38, to the end of the chapter, Jacob is then thinking, well, you want to take Benjamin down. That would be my death. He's basically retelling the story in so many words to the other brothers about how he lost one. My son shall not, here's how it goes in 38. He said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead. There he admits those words again must have hung in the air because again, the reader knows he's not dead. Joseph's not dead. The 10 brothers probably think he's dead. The dad now we know knows, or at least he's stating he must be dead. And so, it just heightens the narrative. But that's why Jacob will not allow his son Benjamin to go down to Egypt, because that's his last, remaining memory of Rachel, who has now died. That's the second boy of Rachel. So that takes us through chapter 42. Again, I'm struck by the deceptions. I count 3 of them. You are spies, verse 14. That's a deception because he knows they're not. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place. Well, that's a bit of a deception because, maybe it isn't, but he's making it sound as though he's purely Egyptian in how he views his world, right? By the life of Pharaoh, where a Yahwist probably wouldn't say that. But anyway, then in verse 23, we heard that he's talking through an interpreter. So they don't know that he can understand them. Yep. Again, that's another part of the deception. So it's good deception, though. It's going to run the story. And that's in Jewish tradition. Again, all's fair in love and war. That idea comes into Jewish tradition in the sense that, and you have to be careful how you say this because the immature mind will run with it and take it the wrong direction, but non-truths given for the sake of peace are often recommended in Jewish tradition, and kind of that's where we're going with here. So I'm ready for 43, if you are.
I guess one thing it is an interesting biting moment. And considering that they have been going through this for 2 decades, the moment in verse 36 when Jacob says to them, in the ESV, it uses the word, you have bereaved me of my children.
Yeah.
And it's so revealing because he's technically talking to his children. He's talking to his other sons. They're all his sons. They may have all had different mothers, but they are all his sons. And yet this statement alone was pretty much declaring, you may be biologically my sons, but emotionally he was attached to the children of just Rachel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know, that's experienced something like that, or implicitly experiencing that for 20 something odd years. That must have been torture.
Yeah.
And knowing that you're part of the reason why your father really considers himself basically almost childless.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they should have known. Yeah. But
yeah. So anyhow, I mean, it's not really DCW. It was just for me fleshing out the fact of like, holy cow, that's a terrible thing to hear as a son.
Yeah. 43. Now the famine was severe in the land. We know from the timing, Chris says 7 years of plenty followed by 2 years of famine. They come down originally in 42 because of the famine. So when you come to 43:1 and it says the famine was severe, we would read that to mean that the famine, which we know will be 7 years total, it must have started and become so severe that we're probably in year 2 or so. And it turns out that that's exactly what it'll be. That 2 years into the 7-year famine, which comes after the 7 years of plenty, again, now brings you to 43:1. And I find fascinating in verse 2, it came to pass when they had eaten up the grain which they had brought. And I wrote in my Bible, what about Simeon? I mean, have they not forgotten that their brother is languishing down in an Egyptian prison, even while they're eating their scarce grain at this point? So he's still up or down in Egypt, and they're just going through the end of their food there in verse 2. Verses 3 through 14, then, Judah volunteers to be a guarantee for Benjamin. And you have this back and forth between Judah and his father, Jacob. Again, watch for Judah. He will be, we know this from the end of the story, he will be picked on in a positive way for something we'll see in chapter 49. And maybe it's because of these kinds of character traits that come out of Judah during the story that is so. So Judah says in verse 8, for example, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go that we may live and not die. So he says, I'll be a surety for him. If I can't bring Benjamin back with me, you can have my own family in exchange. And that takes us through the end of 14. 15 to 22, then, the 10 brothers go down to Egypt and stand before Pharaoh. They take double money with them. They bring Benjamin with them. And in verse 16, when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of the house, take these men to my home, slaughter an animal, make ready, for these men will dine with me at noon. So again, the reader is getting more tense as he experiences this story, because it doesn't really tell you ahead of time how forgiving Joseph's going to be. Again, if you know the story, you know where it goes. But imagine if you did not know why Joseph's bringing these men into his own home. And that reflects verse 18. The men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house. So we're supposed to feel nervous with the author at this point. Otherwise, anything up to verse 22. 20. Go ahead.
I did notice, I'm not sure like how's it in the New King James. I'm trying to find what the underlying word in verse 14 is, but it says, may God Almighty in the ESV.
Yeah, El Shaddai is used there. It's the fourth time we have El Shaddai used in Genesis. I wrote down the other 3. Where is that? I don't have it with me here, but yeah, El Shaddai is used in the lips of Jacob there. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so it's just interesting that, yes, like even though the name Yahweh doesn't appear, yet we do have the other pretty significant name appear here, like God Almighty or El Shaddai. So it is interesting. And
here it is. Yeah, this is the last of 4 uses in Genesis. 17:1, Yahweh uses it himself. Isaac uses it in 28:3. Yahweh again uses it in 35:11. And now Jacob uses it in 43:14. So El Shaddai, God of the highest, God of the mountain. We're not sure exactly what Shaddai means, but it's something about height and greatness and power. So
yeah,
probably a word that was used to define Yahweh many times, I would suspect, within the story in their own language, whatever that language was. Again, some kind of a Proto-Hebrew. Mm-hmm. All right, 43:23. This is a key verse because for the first time in 22 years, again, all 12 brothers are in the same room. 23, he said, "Peace be with you." This is, by the way, deception number 4. Mm-hmm. "Do not be afraid. And I would put a small g on God here. If Joseph is trying to be totally deceptive, and he was, he wouldn't capitalize the G on God there. He would be, if anything, speaking low of these men's gods, God or gods, because that's how he would have sounded as a Pharaoh or a Egyptian. So anyway, I'm just saying, I would put a small g in verse 23. "Your Elohim and the God or the Elohim of your father has given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money." Well, that's not true. He put the money there, but again, he's trying to deceive them, and I think he does it very carefully. If he had said Yahweh there, he would have given himself away, or again, if they even had that word available, I shouldn't presume they had it, but he's being very careful in using the word Elohim, or the equivalent word I would recommend, probably without a capital letter.
And it's singular because the verb put in the ESV is in the third person masculine singular. So he's not saying your gods and the gods of your father. It is singular. So the definition, the word has to be translated as a singular God.
Yep. Verses 24-34, Joseph puts his brothers now into, again, I think this is planned, this is rehearsed in Joseph's mind. He's putting his brothers into a familiar situation of jealousy. So by the time you get to verse 34, 24-34 again, he sets the men according to their age when they come into his house, which again, he knew their ages, and he's deceiving them into thinking this was divination or something. But he they all sit there eating, realizing we are seated according to our age. How did he know that? And then Benjamin was given 5 times as much food as the others, which is quite a pile, right? And again, what he's doing, it sounds like or seems like, is putting Benjamin in the position that Joseph, was in some 22 years ahead of time. And he wants to see how his brothers respond to this position of authority over a young boy that they could take advantage of. And will they be frustrated? Will they rat him out? Will they say, we're not doing this again? And as it were, walk away from the situation in frustration. So that's what he's looking for.
It's kind of funny. Instantly, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking if I had to preach this on a Sunday, it's especially to speak to the younger generation folks in our church, I probably would use some Gen Z language to essentially help them understand what Joseph is doing here. He's essentially sussing this all out. He's trying to figure out, like, have they changed in 27 odd years? Are they, like, the way they treated me, are they going to do the same to Benjamin? I have no doubt part of the reason he wanted to see Benjamin was he really wanted to see his younger brother. Mm-hmm. But also was like, I've been gone. And so there's been no one besides maybe my dad who's been protecting Benjamin. And if they did this to me, what would they have done to Benjamin? And I suspect that he's trying to bait them, giving them this huge amount just to see, how are you going to react? Are you going to be the same? Are you going to have the same reactions like I remember 20 something odd years ago? And and also just that whole entire divination moment of them realizing we're seated at our ages. I would also probably use the word, like, Joseph is trolling them at that point. he's upping their feelings of anxiety and of angst because, again, he's trying to test out and kind of figure out what has changed and not changed about these guys.
Right. And again, it all seems very well prepared. I think he thought about this long and hard. how he was going to do it. And let's keep moving. Chapter 44. Now the 11 brothers with Benjamin, with the other 10, they head back up to Canaan. But by verse 1, or within verse 1, we realize this is again a ploy, because he puts, or Joseph says, fill the men's sacks with food and put each man's money in the mouth of the sack. And verse 2, also put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, and his grain money. So again, we sense that Joseph had thought about what he was going to do to push the ante up even higher. Then verses 4 to 13 is just the narrative of them moving away or heading north out of Egypt. And they are stopped by the steward. And again, another deception, verse 4, why have you repaid evil for good? Which they didn't, but you've got to pretend as though they did. And the cup then is found, by the time you get to verse 13, the cup is found in Benjamin's sack, verse 12. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, and they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. That's all that's just the story so far. I'm ready for verse 14, really to the end of the chapter. Is Judah now again takes the lead in explaining his brother's actions. And here's where I think, Mike, what was Joseph's plan from here? Maybe we'll never know. Maybe, and I suspect the way 45, which we're not getting to this time, 45 is going to start by saying Joseph couldn't take it anymore. In other words, his plan to continue this ruse was breaking down in his own emotional ability to handle it. So I wonder where he was going to go with it. But we learn in 34 or 14 to 34 that Judah then comes, and several times his name is mentioned, 14, 16, 18. He does most of the speaking. In fact, after 18, I think it's all Judah. Yes, Judah gets the quotation mark from 18 all the way to the end of 44. And the key, which will basically move Joseph to give up his ploy, or to give up this ruse, is verses 31 to 33, which read this way. It will happen when he, my dad Jacob, sees that the lad Benjamin is not with us, that he will die. So your servants will bring down the gray hair of your servant our father with sorrow to the grave, for your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. Now, therefore, and here's what I think got Joseph in his heart the most. Please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. So the memory of hearing Judah back in 37 say, let's sell him, is been on his mind for some 20 years. And now for Joseph to hear that same guy, Judah, his older brother, then say, you know what, let me stay here, let Benjamin go back. For whatever reason, that finally turned Joseph into a pile of emotional mush, and he couldn't go on any longer. So again, we can hang on for 45 till next time, but that's how the story moves, that he's hearing his brothers possibly talk. Well, again, they don't know he can understand them. So my guess would be that these brothers are yakking back and forth and frustrated and scared and repentant of what they've done to their brother so long ago. But it's the as the editor puts here, or the writer puts here, it's Judah who does the big speech that finally turns Joseph around to where he can't continue anymore. So I would love to know what Joseph was planning, but we'll probably never know.
Yeah. I think it does also, it's probably a good reminder, right? Because a reminder about Judah, because Judah had his own particular chapter before we get to the rest of Joseph's story in 38, where his whole entire everything, what happened to his own sons, and then with Tamar, and then him realizing Tamar was more righteous than him, and he needed to learn how to do the right thing. Like, a part of me, like, it is surprising in some sense, but also not surprising. Whatever happened and the end result of chapter 38 with Tamar, something shifted in Judah, it seems. And if I remember correctly, he's the youngest son of Leah.
Leah, yeah.
And so all of a sudden, you now have the youngest son of Leah, who is from the oldest sister, to now the son of the youngest sister, Rachel. And he essentially is offering his life in exchange for this youngest son. He's the youngest son of Leah. He's exchanging his life for the youngest son of Rachel. And this is the same Judah who suggested to all the other brothers, let's sell Joseph. Let's make some money. Let's not kill him, because we won't make any profit from that. and so all of a sudden, I would just imagine at 20-something odd years, Joseph might have been wondering, did these guys change? Did these dirt bags change? Mm-hmm. And to all of a sudden see the same guy that he probably remembers clearly, you sold me to the Ishmaelites, is now surrendering and forfeiting his life for Joseph's youngest brother. It's like, what happened in 20-something odd years? Something shifted in Judah. So,
So in preaching this text, if you were given 42 to 44, what would be the theme that you would bring out? Probably that, right? I mean, again, maybe not to moralize it or not, and I'm not recommending running away from looking at a text for its moral overtones. That's not wrong to do. I'm just saying that it's funny how Old Testament narratives, like the Samuel sermon I heard at the church I'm talking about before, that wasn't the point of the story, was to moralize what the person did in the text that was chosen. So we're left sometimes wondering how to handle a text, and we often run to sin and the management of that sin when I think there's something usually different or deeper going on. So for me, let me give you my opinion, Mike, and I'll let you have the last word as we close up. But if I were to preach this, meaning somehow for a modern audience, bring a half-hour, 45-minute sermon out of this text, and even put a bow on the top at the end, and hand it to the audience in a word picture, it would be something along the line of, here's how a Yahwist works on the ground. In other words, the difference that's going on, the difference that cannot be missed here is that Joseph is the ultimate Yahwist. He's presented that way in 39. 4 times Yahweh was with him, it says. So if there's anything I would like to draw out of this, especially in a sermonic kind of moment, it would be that being a Yahwist does not mean, you get up from your worship and you just act any way you want. Obviously, it means that if you're going to worship Yahweh, you're going to follow his way of thinking, follow his way of living. And even without the 10 Commandments being written yet, is there enough for Joseph to have known about Yahweh's character to live according to that character, even to the level of, and we're going to see this, coming up, he will forgive his brothers even before they ask for forgiveness. They're going to act, in such a way that I think Joseph can tell they're sorry. But those sorts of things to me are probably what I would preach, is that Yahwism should never be, it never was meant to be a theoretical creed. It was always meant to be the way you even treat people who have mistreated you. So this will predict, as it were, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 6, was it? Pray for your enemy, forgive him. So that's what I'd do. I'm curious what you'd do, Mike.
I mean, I would emphasize probably on the greater arching story. Like everything that I mentioned earlier to you about how, remember what Judah was like. Remember that pivotal moment with Tamar, that this whole entire thing of like, God does work in people's lives, especially if they are humbled. What happens over the years and changes. And this interface with Joseph the Yahwist, that I would just kind of go with just where the story is leading, in that Joseph was dealing with these brothers, probably how he remembered them 20 something odd years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And Judah's behavior, his words, even just his character being on display after 20 something years of going through the crucible of guilt, of shame, of hiding secrets, and at the same time realizing I am not a righteous guy compared to even my daughter-in-law. Mm-hmm. That all this is now on display in front of Joseph and is breaking what Joseph was probably assumed what his brothers were like in 20 something odd years. That it showed him these are not the same people from 2 decades ago. And so whatever his plan was, and the way I probably would sermonize it, is that we may have memories of people who have done us wrong. And it's so easy to assume that they have stayed static for all the years that we have never seen them ever since. But we have no idea what God is doing in the hearts and in the characters of the people that have hurt us. Mm-hmm. And we are only responsible for the moment when we finally meet them. Will we take the time to figure out and learn what has God been doing in their lives? And does my attitude towards that person need to also be adjusted and changed? Yeah. And so like that's probably where I would go. I don't have a homiletical idea. I haven't thought about this long enough. It's just interesting to see these two guys who are seen as leaders within their own, family clan. And it's the interface between Joseph, the ruler, and Judah, who is going to be a representative leader. And this is what ultimately brings the family back together. This resistance, this emotional resistance is finally broken down.
Well, let's keep the people, our listeners, in suspense. We won't let them know what happens in 45 until next time. By the way, I should mention, and I've been asked this by several people, and maybe you have too, Mike, how can people support the podcast financially? The way to do that is to join the DRMSH community. That's Dr. Michael S. Heiser in, acronym, drmsh.com, I believe is that the URL?
That's the URL, yep.
And if you go to that site, you can become a community member there, and that would be the way to support the podcast. So certainly encourage people to do that. There's a lot of things on that website that you can get then, or that are available to those who are in the community. And including the Daily Dose of Bible. It's a series of videos that I've done over 2 years. It was 300 and some videos that I've produced going through the entire Bible from a DCW standpoint. So if you ever are thinking of wanting to have a Bible study that's DCW based, that certainly is. It's a series of videos. It's called Daily Dose of Bible, and it comes out every day, available in the DRMSH communities. So anything else before we call it quits, Mike?
I mean, just about the DRMSH private community. I mean, if folks have never joined before, it contains also the last amount of videos and content that Dr. Heiser, Mike, was able to produce before his passing. Yeah. And so, I mean, there were a lot of things that he tried to do during that wonderful time when he was still alive and the community was still fresh, of just having us read scholarly articles once a week and then just ask questions and have discussion online with him about it. And just little mini Bible studies that he led while he was still able to. And so, that material is still on there, and it's one of the best things I still love about the website, because that's a time that we won't ever get back again. And it's content that is not made available, it's not available right now on YouTube or anywhere for free. It's right now inside the community. And it was really just him and those who've been following his work, just having that conversation with him in that last year or so was precious. So yeah, I would definitely encourage folks to check it out, if anything, for what you're doing with the Daily Dose of Bible, but also for that content that we'll never be able to get again.
Yeah. Very well said. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And again, we'll pick it up next time, seeing where Joseph couldn't take it anymore and see what he does. So until then, have a good time in your Bible study, wherever it takes you, and whatever means you have of opening the Word and understanding it. We're rooting for you, and we love doing it ourselves. So that's what this is all about, and we'll see you next time.